Hello everybody, in today's video we're going to be going over a potentially colder November after this mild October that we saw for much of the eastern two-thirds of the country. We're going to be going over why that may happen and what kind of signs are pointing towards that. We're also going to be quickly covering that snowstorm out in the northern plains and the northern Rockies, giving you an update on how much snow some of those areas saw. We have a ton of information to cover in today's video, so make sure you are staying tuned all the way until the end so you don't miss anything in today's video. So before we get into the actual video, I want to talk about if you have any suggestions, or if you want me to make a forecast about something. If you want me to make a video about any specific topic, I'll be more than happy to do so. If it's more of a localized type of event, if it's really only going to cover a very select area, then I'll probably just write up a forecast for you. But if you ever want me to do any of that, if you want me to talk about maybe a storm that I haven't covered yet, go to my email address, which I put in the bottom left hand corner of the screen, or just comment down below. I respond to pretty much all of your comments, where I at least leave a heart on them so that you guys can see that I looked at that comment. So I look at every single comment that I see, or that's the vast majority of comments, and then I also do respond to pretty much all of the questions that you guys have in the comments. And if you ever have any requests for videos, I know somebody left a request in my email just today for the severe weather taking place in the Northeast in just a couple of days, and I was gonna make a video on that anyways, but that might have tilted me if I was gonna make a video maybe between the rain in the southern plains and the storms in the Northeast. I might now make that video on the Northeast, where I might have dedicated a little bit more time to the southern plains. So that's just to see what you guys want. I'm gonna make the videos, of course, that you guys want to see. There's really no point in me making a video that nobody really will have any stake in. So even if I don't make a video on that topic, I'll still write up a response for you and give you a forecast for your area. And if you ever need a personal forecast, just leave a comment down below as well. So email address is always a great way to contact me, and if you also have any weather photos that you want to send in, I'll feature those if you send them in to the email address. So the current National Weather Service page, we have a few winter storm warnings up in eastern Wyoming, eastern Montana, western South Dakota, and western North Dakota as well, with even a few blizzard warnings, the first blizzard warnings of the season, in parts of eastern Wyoming and one county in northwesternmost Nebraska. We have some winter weather advisories in that dark purple, or that deep purple, for southern Wyoming, as well as a little bit of Montana and North Dakota. Wind advisories in the light brown, and then we have high wind warnings in the kind of gold color for parts of Colorado, Wyoming, Nebraska, and South Dakota. We have frost advisories along parts of Colorado, northern Kansas, and eastern Nebraska. We have flood watches up for central and southern Texas, as well as southeastern Oklahoma, with some more freeze warnings, or actually freeze watches in that light blue, and then freeze warnings in the dark blue for Idaho and Oregon, and then one little area of red flag warnings in northern California. Yesterday we had a high temperature of 101 degrees in Zapata, Texas. The low temperature was 5 degrees, which I believe is the lowest so far this season, in Chote, Montana, which is in western Montana. Highest rainfall report was in Rock Falls, Illinois, where they got 2.88 inches, and the highest snowfall report was 5 miles southwest of Pony, Montana, where they got 28 inches of snowfall. So talking about that snowfall, here's a look at the 72-hour snowfall accumulation. This is going to be based off of not only snowfall reports, but also radar data. So if you saw it maybe in a localized area that nobody can really get to, maybe there's not any roads, or maybe it's a high elevation spot that you're not going to be able to get to, the National Weather Service, or I believe this actually comes from the NOHRSC, and they do all the snowfall maps. So they would basically look at the radar, see if there's a heavy band of snowfall there, and then kind of get an estimated amount of snowfall if there's no way to actually get to that spot. So using a combination of reports and estimated snowfall data, you can see that we were looking at quite a bit. We have 6+ inches anywhere in that pink color. So that covers pretty much the majority of Wyoming, much of central Utah in the higher elevations, central Idaho, in southern Montana, and then also don't forget about western South Dakota as well. The Black Hills saw a ton of snow. Deadwood, South Dakota, which is a beautiful town, by the way. A lot of people think of South Dakota and they think of farmland and they just think of a flat area, but once you get into the western part of the state, there's a little pocket which is heavily forested and it has some nice terrain to it as well. And they typically can get quite a bit of snowfall. And in this case, they got 22 inches reported in Deadwood, and the surrounding areas were all above a foot of snow. So we were looking at heavy amounts of snow in these areas. Eastern Wyoming, looking at about 8 to 12 or more inches of snow. So on a whole, this was a very big event, even for some of these areas further to the south, where we necessarily weren't looking at as much snowfall or weren't expecting as much. And you guys still did get some. You got, even in some of those lower lying spots that aren't necessarily in the higher elevations, they also got some of that snowfall. So all around, it was a pretty nice event. And so far, it's been fairly good for these areas because they did need some snow to at least start off the skiing season. So that's good for them and for the ski resorts to get their snow. And also, if you're a winter weather lover, then of course you would love this type of weather, considering that it's still only mid-October. So let's start talking about the chances of a colder November. So this is the PNA pattern, and I think this is going to really determine how our November is going to go. So here is where we are right now. We're in a very deep negative PNA. We're about 3 standard deviations below the mean, and that's very low. It's very usually the PNA is one of those type of oscillations that are going to either be really low down or they're going to be really high up. So there's really very little middle ground, especially once you get into the winter. You're not really going to spend too much time around this center spot. You're either going to be 2 deviations or more above, or 2 deviations or more below, especially in the winter time when things start to fluctuate a little bit more. So this is again the GFS model, and you can see that as we get to around the 20th, this is when the PNA starts to go positive. So if you don't know what the PNA is, it's the Pacific North America Index, and it covers the western half of North America, or the western third, and then it also covers the eastern Pacific, the eastern slice of the Pacific, from parts of southern Alaska on to areas like California and western Mexico. So that's where this area generally covers, and it shows you whether you have low pressure or high pressure generally dominating that region, and it plots it out onto a chart, which is much easier to get a grasp of what's happening than when you look at a surface map, because you're able to actually see on a chart. It really can show you when exactly it kind of switches from being a negative or a positive pattern. So you can see that we are in that upward trend to a positive pattern. What that would mean is that you have really warm temperatures, or at least fairly warm temperatures, for the west, and then everywhere east of the Rockies would generally be in either a neutral pattern, or maybe you're actually a little bit colder than normal. Once you're in a negative PNA, usually the pattern starts to stagnate. You don't have as much going on in the east, you have a lot going on in the west, but that all reverses once you get into a positive PNA. Usually that's when we see a lot going on in the east, whether that be in the form of cold, snow, severe weather, all of that. And then we don't see as much going on in the west. Now, you do see this little dip after this, right around the 25th or so. And what I think this is signaling is some sort of big storm coming into the western United States. And you can see that it dips and then it goes right back up. So what I'm assuming is that there would be some sort of big storm around this time. So keep your eyes peeled around the 25th for something to come on to the western United States. And then once it departs east of the Rockies, that's when you would see that PNA start to rise once again. So this is a big indicator from the GFS, and we were in that negative pattern for the past few weeks when we've been in a very warm pattern for the eastern United States with a colder pattern, a much colder pattern and snowier pattern for the west. So you can see there is some correlation here. Now, if we look at the NAO, it's actually kind of the opposite of what you would want for snow, but there are some good signs here. So this NAO has actually been negative for quite a while. So now it's actually going to go a little bit positive, which typically is not that good if you want snow, especially in the wintertime. But we do see this sort of gradual decline. I would assume that if you were to extend that out, this is going to slowly come back closer to the neutral line. The NAO does not really go up to these huge areas above or below the mean like the PNA is. The PNA fluctuates way more than what the NAO will. So the NAO is pretty much always going to be within 2 standard deviations of the mean. Not always, but most of the time it'll be fairly close to the average. So either way, it's not really going to tilt the scale all that much. But in the wintertime, you would definitely want this to be negative in order to signal more of a colder pattern. But I think the positive PNA is enough to signal that something in the pattern is going to be changing. And if we look at the AO, you can see that this is negative, and now it is actually going to start to go a little bit more positive, which is also something that you want to watch out for the potential for this pattern to switch. So we're going to look at the GFS model, and we're going to take this out over the next 15 days. Now, this is something that I don't do all that often, but I'm only going to look at the upper air map with this, so I'm not going to look at anything on the surface really, because that is going to be way too far out to look at, and I just want to kind of show you a general idea of what's expected. Now, we just looked at what the GFS was showing for the PNA, the NAO, and the AO, and now we're going to look at what it's going to be showing, the same exact model on the upper air maps, because this is going to actually give you an idea of what the negative PNA means and what the positive NAO means and what all of that is going to actually interact with and what that's going to bring to the equation. So here's your positive NAO that's starting to develop up there. We have that high pressure, and then we have our negative PNA out in the west. So this is that big trough which is bringing all that snow into the western United States. This would be by Thursday. If we move this on to Saturday, maybe you get a quick shot of colder air as we get into Saturday, but really nothing that's going to linger on. And you can see that we still have this big area of broader, colder, and low pressure pattern over the western half of the continent, pretty much. So the western third of North America is dealing with those colder temperatures with a above average amount of precipitation. This would be by Wednesday of next week, and you can see that we're now starting to see a little bit change within the pattern. So you have some ridging, which is developing over the west, but really does not change anything, especially in the east, because you still have this big ridge also in the east. So we really don't have a lot changing in the pattern if you live east of the Rockies, but we will start to see that happen as we get into late next week and maybe the week after. So I'm thinking the week of the 25th is probably going to be when it starts to get a little bit colder based on what we're seeing from some of these models. So you can see that we have high pressure starting to dominate the Arctic regions. So for northern Canada, you guys are getting in on some of the really above normal temperatures, which it's still going to be cold up there, but it is warmer than normal, at least for this couple week span. Now, this is when it starts to get colder, and notice what happens. We have a ridge in the west, which means that you have to have a trough in the east, or at least most times you're going to have a trough in the east, and that's because the upper air is always trying to maintain equilibrium, so it's always trying to stay equal. So if you have a really high amount of pressure up in the west, you're going to need to balance that out with a low amount of pressure in the east, and that's what we end up seeing. So if you have really warm temperatures in the west, you need to have colder temperatures in the east in order to balance everything out so that everything kind of doesn't explode. So you would need somewhere for that energy to go, and in this case, it's moving into the east. Now, that area of low pressure moves to the east. Now, I'm not really concerned with each individual low pressure. What I am interested in is how we start to see this pattern, instead of being in this set deep trough, which does not move like it was doing for the past 2 weeks. We're now starting to see a couple storms move from the west and move further to the east. We're seeing them come from the Gulf of Alaska and move further to the east. So we're now starting to see that progression from west to east within the pattern, which we were not seeing in the past 2 weeks when we were dealing with this very cold pattern for the western United States. So And that's a big change. So even if you're not dealing with sustained cold air, you're at least dealing with a few shots. And by the way, this is still late October. So I'm thinking that by November, we're going to see this pattern pretty much be set in stone, where it's going to be a fairly firm and cold November for most of these spots in the eastern half or 2/3 of the United States. Here would be the 10 millibar map from the European model, and this is something that I like to look at, especially in the fall and winter, because that's when it really gives you a good idea of what's happening. So this is a few thousand feet up, actually a couple dozen thousand feet up in the atmosphere. So this is way up there, and you're gonna start to see that we're gonna have a little bit of a change in parts of the stratosphere. So this is the stratosphere right here, and we have the Arctic Circle right here. So this is indicating where your polar vortex is. Your polar vortex would be this kind of circular shape, which you can see on those lines drawn on the screen. The orange would be indicating any warming, and we're actually going to start to see a little bit of a stratospheric warming event into northern Canada, eastern Siberia, and that general region for right here is going to start to undergo a stratospheric warming event. And again, because you need to maintain equilibrium, you're going to be dealing with a lot of colder temperatures developing out here. And that's going to actually start to spill into the eastern United States. So here would be the next frame. So this is for right now. If we look at for just in another 10 days, this is what it looks like. We have all that warming out for northern Canada and Alaska, and then look what happens. We have this colder air mass, which is now developing for much of Europe. And we know that Europe typically gets the weather a little bit earlier than the United States, so you would expect something to move up into the eastern United States and eastern Canada within a week or so of this occurring. Now, this is not going to come right at that time. You're not going to see this happen right when the stratosphere changes. You're not going to you're not really going to feel that effect on the surface. So that's why a lot of people don't talk about it, because you're not going to feel those effects right away. You're going to have to wait 2 or 3 weeks, because again, remember, we're thousands and thousands and thousands of feet up. So you're going to need time for what's happening thousands and thousands of feet up to actually translate down to the surface. I believe this is about 100 or 110,000 feet up at the level that we're looking at right now. So you're going to need time for that to translate down to the surface, and usually it's about 2 to 3 weeks. So if you're dealing with really warm temperatures here, and this is October 22nd, let's add about 20 days to that, and you're looking at about November 10th or 11th when you would see something like this or something similar to this on the surface. And then if we look at for Europe and the North Atlantic, you're going to have the same thing. Probably between November 5th and 15th is when you would start to see somewhat of a pattern like this develop. I think this is one of the biggest developments that we've seen. Now we're seeing that the polar vortex is starting to stretch out, which is very good news if you like colder or snowier temperatures or snowier conditions, because when you have a polar vortex that's just kind of sitting here wrapped up, it's not moving anywhere, meaning that the cold air is not moving into Europe or into North America. And so you're going to have a fairly warm winter because you're not dealing with any source of cold air. But we're already starting to see that by November, we're dealing with this starting to break apart a little bit, something that we did not see in the 2019-2020 winter, that we did not see in the 2018-2019 winter too much, but something that we did see in the 2020-2021 winter, and what we are expecting to see in the 2021-2022 winter. So you can see a correlation between snowy and non-snowy years, or less snowy years, when you look at the stratosphere and how it was interacting with itself as we get into November and October. So this is a good sign if you do like cold and snow, the fact that this is starting to break apart. And if we also look at something else, this is the snow cover. You can actually see that for this year, which is on the left-hand side of your screen. We actually do have a decent amount of snow cover, considering that this was taken October 12th, so this was yesterday when this image was created. And you can see that we do have pretty much all of Greenland, which is always covered with snow, of course, pretty much year round. Eastern Siberia, which is a big development, and then also northern Canada, Alaska, and then you see that snow in the Rockies as well. So that golden color indicates where you were snow covered. Now this was for last year at the same time, and you can see what the snow cover looked like. So you can see not as expansive. When you have more snow cover earlier on in the season, it means that typically you are going to have some correlation between snowier winters and higher snowpack, especially in Siberia. So it's not really going to have too big of a correlation. I wouldn't look too much into this, but it's not really gonna mean that you're gonna see cold air. But if you were to see cold air, typically you're gonna have those temperatures be a little bit below normal. So what that would mean is, because you're getting snow cover earlier, it's gonna lower the average temperatures in eastern Siberia and eastern Russia, and that's where your cold source is. That's where we get our cold air here in North America. So when you have your cold source maybe a few degrees below normal, it's not going to guarantee that you'll actually get any cold air from that. But if you were to get any cold air from that, it would be a little bit colder than in the non-snowy years for Siberia in October and November. It's a little bit far out there in terms of some of the theories, but I at least want to show it because some people do believe that this has a correlation. I think it does have somewhat of a correlation, but whether it's really going to have too big of an impact, I really don't think so. I still think that it's important to look at. You want to look at as many things as possible when it comes to making your forecast, because it really is not going to hurt you to look at this and just kind of see some correlations between last year and what we have this year, which is actually quite a bit snowier. So that is going to wrap it up for today's video. We talked about a lot over this 20 or 22 minute span. So hopefully you guys did enjoy that. Again, if you have any questions or comments, leave them down below in the comment section. And then especially if you have any requests for videos, anything important, or not important, but anything special that maybe I would miss in the comment section, leave that in my email address or send an email to that, because I'll definitely be checking that. So if you have anything that you urgently want me to see in terms of a weather photo, if you have a request for a video, again, if you have a request for maybe a storm that's going to be occurring in your area or over a broader area around you that you want to see covered, just let me know. I'm not going to really cover on the YouTube channel itself. I'm not going to make videos on very localized events. So if it's going to be an event that's only going to really affect your area and your small little stretch of towns, then I'm probably not going to make a video on that. But if it is affecting a good portion of your state or of your region, then of course I'll make a video on that. And if I'm not going to make a video on it, I'll at least leave a forecast for you, a personal forecast in the reply. So if you have any requests for videos, if you have any requests for me to change anything in my videos, anything with the format of my videos, or also if you have any weather photos, send that all to my email address, which is in the description down below. And that is going to wrap it up for today's video. So I'll see you guys tomorrow. Goodbye.